Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here to give a talk to you. Is a pleasure and a privilege. I have been lucky enough to speak to audiences around the world, and I've often talked about how a young mother of triplets becomes a world record holder to having skied to both the North and South Poles in all-women teams. I've spoke about leading teams on the ice and how leading both mixed teams and male teams. But I always talk about success and resilience and teamwork and positivity and all those things that make us successful and help us to get there. But what do when you do everything you possibly can? When you work at your very best and you have done everything, but you still fail at your mission? What happens then? Well, it happened for me. And actually, life didn't fall apart. What it did, it gave me time to rethink, to learn new things. So what did happen? By April 2024, I finished my last expedition, and I was then known as a successful polar explorer, the top of my field. I had world records. I'd led expeditions to the North Pole, and I'd been on the South Pole and to the South Pole. It was great, and every expedition was successful. It wasn't expected to be successful, but we did everything right and it worked. And riding on that success, I was positive, confident. I made the decision to try an expedition to walk solo to the North Pole. No woman had ever done it. Not walked from land solo to the North Pole. And I felt confident that my experience, I could be that person. I spent 2 years planning it, raising money, doing everything I could. Even raising money was tough, but I got there. And so in March 2005, I went to the very tip of Siberia by helicopter to begin my bid. I left from Cape Arctichevsky, and it's true to say that right at the very beginning, I was terrified. My eyes will tell it all. I didn't know how I was going to cope. Would I be okay? Would I be able to do it? So I did what I always do. I took a deep breath, take the first step. The first step is always the hardest. And I did. And I set off along this desolate landscape, all alone, thousands of miles of shifting ice and snow, pulling an extraordinarily heavy sledge. I was afraid, but I kept going. The ice, when you leave from the Russian side of the Arctic Ocean, there is a lot more open water. It moves away from land. Where there's a lot more open water, there are more bears. I had never had a bear experience in all my expedition life. And of course, I'm on my own, and on day one, it happens. I was a bit afraid, well, I was a lot afraid, quite frankly, but I was a little bit afraid about not being able to see them in all this white. But actually, they show up really well. They're quite cream, and I spotted it. The bear is a really odd, counterintuitive thing that you need to do. The bears start to come towards you because they're curious about what you are. There are no communities up there, and you have to let them get really close, and then you fire a warning shot with your gun. You need to take one up there. You won't get a permit without a gun, but it's to use to frighten the bears away. And it was textbook. The bears ran away, and my first encounter was finished. So I set off again. I had other bear encounters, and they always went really well. But my first real challenge came on day 7. I put my tent up. I'm exhausted. I've been skiing all day, and I put my tent up, fell asleep after dinner, and in the morning I woke up frozen and ate my breakfast. And as I was eating breakfast, I could see a shadow on my tent. At first I thought, oh, who's that? And I realized there's nobody else out there. And I opened the tent, and this huge male bear was just outside my tent. My tent was small that I was in on my own, and when I opened it, he was so close I could see the very fur, the little bits of strands. And so I got my gun and I shot to his left, and he just looked down and looked at me as if to say, "Is that it?" Then I thought, oh, okay, I'll shoot to the right. And I shot to the right, nothing. And now I had two fears. I've got 4 bullets left, and I've got to get home safely. I don't want to kill a bear. That was terrifying me. I've brought myself into its environment. I'm here to hopefully spread the word of what's going on out here. I love this place, and that was a fear, but I also was afraid that this guy is not moving. So I shot over his head, and thankfully he looked up, dropped on all fours, and just left me. So I quickly packed my tent up and set off north. And as I'm going north, I could see him behind a ridge. And I thought, right, well, I'm not going for him. Let's cut east and just see what he does, because he was stationary. And I cut east, and he began to track me. And I realised he was tracking me. I kept an eye on him. And so I thought, right, well, if he's tracking me, just go north. And I cut behind him, and he looked and left. But he didn't leave fully. And for 3 days, that bear stalked me. 3 days on my own, he's with me. I didn't see him every second of the day. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for a few hours, but I could feel him. When you're own with all that ice and snow, you become one with nature. And then about 2/3 of the way through the 3rd day, he left me. And I knew immediately. It wasn't, I hadn't seen him for 2 days, he must have gone. I just didn't feel his presence. And that terrible experience was also the most beautiful and wonderful experience of my polar career to that time. When I came home, I had a bear made. I had it made in his image. I drew it. It's very school-like, but it's to remind me that sometimes our biggest challenges, when we get through them, they can be our most precious memories. We forget the small, everyday stuff, but we remember the big things. And he still now is with me in my heart, and if I get nervous, I just touch it. It just gives me a bit of courage. I had other encounters, but not like that, and I pulled my sledge. Every day I swam through water, I climbed ridges, I went through difficult ice, but I was making good progress. On day 21 I'd skied 175 miles. I put my tent up on day 21 and I called my base. I started that long ago, it was HF radio, but now, by then, we're on satellite phones, and I would call every 2 days, and I spoke to Ian Wesley. And as soon as I spoke to him, I could hear by his voice there was a problem. And so he let me get all the information out, where I was, what I'd been up to, and my sit rep. And then I said, Ian, please speak to me. I'm dying here. And he went, I don't know how to tell you, but your permit has been removed from this expedition. You have to have permits from the country you leave from. And so every permit, but every expedition that year was removed. There were 2 other expeditions, and every permit was removed. And I sat there in tears waiting for the MI8 helicopter to come along and pick me up from the ice. It picked one of the other teams up first, came and picked me up, and then went and got the 3rd team. There was nothing I could do to change that outcome. No amount of positivity or resilience was getting me to the pole. There was nothing. And I got on that flight, and I was devastated. Oh my gosh, my dreams have come to an end. They've wrecked me getting to the pole. How terrible. I took a breath. It was quite a flight back, and all expeditions were upset on that flight. But I began to process it quite quickly. It had been horrific down there. And I thought about it, and I thought about what was happening in the world, the bigger, wider world. It was March 2005, and in December 2004, there had been the horrific tsunamis in Asia. People had lost their lives, their homes. There were wars around the world, and I began to think about that. And I thought, actually, what's happened to you? It's not that bad. You've had a great adventure. You really have. You've had polar bear encounters. And how can you say that somebody else has stopped you getting to your goal? Maybe the next polar bear encounter would have ended horribly. Maybe you died. Maybe the polar bear would have been shot. Maybe they saved you from that. Or maybe you'd have gone through the ice. Or maybe you just wouldn't have made it. And then I really thought about it, and I thought, if you're honest, Anne, really honest, there's a part of you that's glad you're not there. It was so tough. And so by the time I got off that helicopter, nothing had changed. Nothing, apart from how I thought about it. And not only was I at peace, I was joyful about it. Joyful. So what did my future hold? Well, I was never going to be a model. I need to think of something else. And for me, I love the Arctic Ocean. I've always known that we are the apex of the animal kingdom, the apex predator, if you will. What I'd learned through my expedition life and being at one with nature is actually we're the apex predators of the planet. It is changing. I've seen the ice changing. We know we're in a changing world. And if I was going to put myself through that again, I was going to do it for more than my own gratification. Thankfully for me, I have a really good friend, Penn Haddo. He's a polar explorer. He was the first man to go unsupported from land to the North Pole, and he put together the Catlin Arctic Survey. He spent years putting a scientific expedition together. This expedition was not about getting to the North Pole. He was working with scientists around the world, respected scientists, in order to achieve something different through modern-day explorers. It had been done in the past, but modern-day explorers working with scientists for the purpose of science. And we'd had a lot of conversations, and I was thrilled when I got the call and he asked me to be the navigator of his expedition. This expedition, this scientific expedition, was the first polar expedition to be given a royal pennant since Shackleton was given permission to fly the Union flag for his expedition south. I felt that this was a huge thing to do for me and hopefully even a small bit for this world we live in. My job was navigator. I was at the very front of the team for 73 days. I felt the responsibility of keeping the team safe on ice, and I was also responsible for the logistics of the day, making sure everybody had enough time to do what they needed to do. This expedition, we were following a transect that was picked by the scientists themselves. It wasn't to the North Pole, and we were measuring the thickness of the ice on the Arctic Ocean. We did this every day, and therefore that was why Penn asked me to be at the front, because he needed to do the science. We were collecting data. We weren't trying to understand it. We were simply collecting data. But we felt as a team that it was great to do that. But if we couldn't share it with the world, and we couldn't share it through the emotion of photographs, would it really make a difference? And so Martin Hartley, the other person on the expedition, the second person, he was our photographer, and he captured every moment, well, not every moment, but he captured the whole expedition, mainly on photographs, but with film as well, so that we could share it. And Penn, he had to do the science. So every night, after a grueling day, he would start drilling outside, physically drilling the ice and measuring it with a tape measure. During the day, we were hauling sledges, not only full of expedition equipment, but scientific equipment. And he was annotating every rubble field, every open water, every ridge. And during breaks, he took snow depth measurements. So he hardly had time for breaks. I would take him a drink or make sure he ate. It was constant for 73 days. And after that time, we stopped. That was the end of it. And David Shuckman came on in, the climate correspondent for the BBC, and we left the ice. That expedition was so successful. Papers were written, real papers by scientists, and Penn was invited to talk at COP15. And it was so successful that more scientists wanted to come on board. And Catlin were our sponsors. They also wanted to sponsor the next expedition. Because it was bigger, Penn Haddo stepped out, and a Royal Marine called Charlie Patton came into his role. Mine was the same. This one for 75 days was at the front. Martin's, again, he captured it. And Charlie took over Penn's role to drill through the ice every night. But having done that, the actual hole that he'd measured, he then would drop a device that would measure how fast the water in the ocean was moving, and also the temperature at different depths down. On top of that, we collected water samples. Because the truth is, as we put more CO2 into our atmosphere, the ocean absorbs part of it. It always has. But we are putting so much CO2 in now, there is a concept that it's causing ocean acidification. So changing the very chemistry of our oceans. And our job was to collect the water and take it back to scientists who are working on this. And they are still doing that now. We use different ways to cross areas. I was always a little afraid when I joined a men's team. No matter what male team it was, I will never pull as much weight. I'm not even big as a female, and my physical biology cannot pull as much weight. And that used to bother me a little bit. Until I remembered the things I talk about, we all have skills. And if we use the skills that we can have, it doesn't matter whether we do different things. Who cares if I pull a tea bag less than the guys? I'm the navigator. And I stick to what I can do and don't worry about. The one thing I could do, because I'd done it so many times, is swim through the water. And so rather than us all getting in, I would get in and swim with the rope attached while the men would wrap the sledges together, and then I pulled them across. And I was always thoughtful of that, is for just a few minutes of every day, because we saw water every day, I could pull more weight than the guys for those minutes. But they trusted me to do it. They didn't say, oh, we must do the tough jobs, Anne. It was a real team working together. We got to the pole, it was to the pole on that event, and we did our last hole and came back. The final Catlin Arctic survey, we took a scientist. It was shorter, it was 45 days. We took a scientist and we took a filmmaker, and so there were two of us leading this expedition, myself and Tyler Fish. The scientist's job, Adrian McCallum, was every night he would drop a different probe and he measured the salinity, how much salt is in the water, and again the temperatures. And he did this because as more ice caps are putting fresh water into the ocean, it's changing the salinity, and again that's having an effect on our oceans and the marine life. We had a full film maker, Phil, and so each day he captured it all on camera. And because Tyler and I were sharing the front, it was great at times. I could be at the back and I could watch the team. I felt like they were my team, and I'm sure Tyler felt the same, and we were one. But it was great to just look at it and take some time to breathe in the beauty of this place. When we stopped, Adrian would do his work, and Tyler and I also swapped in the duties. Mine were always tent duties, so I was always in there cooking on my own while there was science and photographs going. But on this occasion, every other day, Tyler would cook and do the tent, and I was out drilling, and I loved that aspect of being able to do everything. That expedition also came to an end, and that was the final Catlin Arctic survey. Wasn't the end for me, and still isn't. I was super fortunate enough that I was asked to look after an expedition going to the North Pole. They were skiing the last 40-ish miles, and I was looking after the film crew who were filming them for a documentary. When I was going up there, I was I'd worked with NASA previously on another expedition, and I contacted them and said, can I help in any way while I'm up there doing this job? And they sent me a tracking beacon. I said, yeah, you can. And as part of the Ice Bridge program, I took up this tracking beacon, which things had gone on so much more, and it measured the thickness of the ice as I hauled it to the pole, and I left it there. And NASA gave me my own mission tagline, and it stayed there after they left, and they would send me photographs of my tracking beacon that belonged to NASA. And so long after I had left, it was still doing some work out on the ocean. And that filled me with so much happiness and just so much self-worth. And that all came about because I had failed. Because I'm fairly confident if I'd made to become the first woman in the world to do that, I would have kept on that path and done that. But the scientific expeditions, they're the expeditions that I'm the most proud of, that I feel were more worthwhile for what I did. And so for me, just because you failed, and I use that word a lot, I love owning it. I don't need to put a nice word around it. To me, I love it, because it doesn't mean I'm a failure. It means that I just haven't managed to do what I thought I would do at that point. It doesn't make me a failure. It means I've learned something. I have new skills, and I can rethink and go on and use those new learned skills to hopefully achieve more success for my next venture. Thank you for listening to me, and have a wonderful day.